Good evening, everyone, and welcome to UCL. I'm Robert Hazel. I'm a professor in the School of Public Policy, and I'm chairing tonight's lecture. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Nick Clegg. Sir Nick Clegg, he's been knighted since he was last in this hall. Welcome back to UCL. He needs no introduction. I will give you a 30-second intro. A member of the European Parliament for 5 years, a member of the Westminster Parliament for 12 years, leader of the Liberal Democrats for 8 of those years, and Deputy Prime Minister in the coalition government. And very sadly, at the election 6 months ago, last summer, he ceased to be an MP for Sheffield, having been defeated by a very narrow margin of just over 2,000 votes. But that in some ways has liberated him to campaign very, very strongly on those issues that he really, really cares about. And tonight's issue he cares about passionately. I will give a puff for Nick's book, if he is too modest to do so himself, How to Stop Brexit, available in all good bookshops. He's going to talk for about 20 minutes, and that will allow an hour for questions and discussion, of which I'm sure there will be plenty. And we're aiming to finish just before 8 o'clock. If you want to tweet, there is the hashtag up on the slide. Nick, let me now welcome you to the lectern, and thank you very, very much for coming back to UCL.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you all for coming here this evening. It's wonderful to be back in this hall. I will, as you suggest, I will sort of get the ball rolling by setting out some thoughts about Brexit and indeed my own views about how and why and in what manner it could be averted. And then obviously I'm keen to take your questions, your observations, your vitriol, your polemic, whatever you want to throw in this direction. I mean, the first thing to say, as Robert just outlined, I was in elected politics for close to 20 years, and until I was sort of unceremoniously spat out by the voters of Sheffield Hallam last summer. So you might well ask yourself, why on earth am I still sort of banging on about political things? Why don't I just sort of gracefully disappear or disgracefully disappear? And I think the reason actually isn't a very political reason at all, if I may just start with a personal note. And I don't really say this as an ex-politician or an ex-this or a former that. I really just feel very viscerally, as much as anything else, as a father of 3 young boys, I just find it, at a human level, intolerable, the idea that a referendum decided on a very, very narrow margin. Remember, there's only 650,000 votes in it. If 650,000 voters who voted for Brexit had voted the other way, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. Held in a very sort of slapdash way by the Prime Minister and the government of the day, won by the winning side on not just one, but on a whole sort of menu, a sort of cornucopia of falsehoods, none of which, not just some of which, none of which are being acted upon or are being delivered now, and towards a future where the powers that be still haven't told us what they want. And I just find it intolerable in the 21st century, the idea that we have to put up with that. And that we're sort of told by the kind of hysterical ghouls at the Daily Mail and elsewhere that democracy basically stopped on the 23rd of June. Time stopped. It's like an Old Testament moment. A tablet of stone was issued by the British people apparently on the 23rd of June, and we have no right to revisit that, to review that, to challenge that in the light of changing circumstances, even though, since the 23rd of June 2016, the world has already moved on. The facts around Brexit and our membership of the European Union have already altered significantly since since that fateful day. And perhaps, most importantly of all, certainly I would have thought relevant, particularly relevant to an audience in a great university like this, it was a decision taken in the way that I've described, and I don't really know of any other mature democracy anywhere in the world, in the modern era, that has done this, in which a radical change of direction was decided upon about our future in a very abrupt way, against the explicit stated wishes of those who have to inhabit that future, the young. There is no other democracy I know of that has done anything as radical as this, to decide that we're now going to go in that direction when young voters in their droves, and the stereotype, of course, is always that young voters don't vote. Actually, young voters voted in large numbers. Over 60% of 18 to 24-year-old voters turned out, and 70% of those voters said, no, hang on, we want to go this way. I just find all of that wrong, unsustainable, and in my view, needs to be vigorously challenged. So that, if you like, is a small insight into why I continue to bother you on the radio and the television when some of you may think that I should just go away into a sort of corner somewhere, wherever former deputy prime ministers go, and just quietly shut up. Three things. First, I want to, if I may, say a few words about our nation's European identity. And I say this because I think one of the reasons why British Euroscepticism has always been, or traditionally, been a lot stronger than Euroscepticism in other countries is that we have always taken a uniquely narrow and purely economic approach to our place in the family of nations that makes up the European community and then the European Union. And that has always set us apart, in my view, in quite a big way, a fundamental way, to the attitudes of other countries. If I think my mother is Dutch, if I think of my mum's country, the Netherlands, and indeed all the other founding nations of the European community in the 1950s, I mean, of course, there was lots of technical stuff around at the time, the Monet, Schumann, all these people, and they invented the common agricultural policy and the European coal and steel community and so on. But actually the prime emotional motive was to entrench peace after a century in which our extraordinary continent, Europe, had been drenched in the blood of millions and millions of people who perished in two, not just one, two world wars in very quick succession after another. And the prime motive for European integration was to make sure that that enmity and that conflict and violence could never again engulf Europe. My wife, as some of you may know, is Spanish. I remember years ago, Miriam comes from a small agricultural community in Castilla y León, in the middle of Spain, and her aunts and uncles and so on were all sort of small-holding sugar beet farmers. And I remember speaking to one of her uncles as he was standing proudly showing me his sugar beet field. This is years ago now, maybe 20 years ago or so. And I remember he didn't really know, in fact, he didn't care to know too much about how the European community worked. But he was so proud as a Spaniard that Spain was finally at the high table of European democracies after the dark chapter of fascism in Spain. And you feel, and I'm sure there are people here from Spain, Greece, Portugal, you hear this again and again in those countries in southern Europe who joined the European community, that yes, again, lots of technical paraphernalia to do with those countries' entry into the European community in the European Union. But above all, much like peace after war was the primary positive emotional motive for the founding members, I think for many people in those countries it was democracy after fascism. Speak to folk in Central and Eastern Europe. Central and Eastern Europe at the moment, many of you may come from countries in Central and Eastern Europe, you might know this better than I do. In fact, you undoubtedly will. If you look at what's happening in Poland and Hungary, There's a very worrying turn towards the politics of chauvinism, division, xenophobia, nationalism. But actually, popular commitment to Central and Eastern Europe's entry into the European Union is very, very strong. Why? Because in my view, it's anchored, it's sort of glued together by a sort of very profound conviction that after 70 years of Soviet communism, the European Union is the kind of guarantor of the freedoms of Hungary, of Poland, the Czech Republic, and other countries that previously had been labouring under the yoke of Soviet communism. So all of those countries, it seems to me, in different ways, peace after war, democracy after fascism, freedom after communism, joining the European club said something powerfully positive and emotive about their own identity. And in that perspective, the United Kingdom has almost been on our own, really, in taking a much, how can I put it, almost less emotional, less poetic, less visceral approach. I'm too young to remember the referendum in the mid-1970s. I was born in 1967. But all the accounts I've read about it hinged on claim and counterclaim about the price of butter. As if our membership of the European Club could be settled by taking out a pocket calculator in the supermarket and working out whether you are marginally a few pence better off or not. And exactly the same happened in the referendum in 2016. Did David Cameron, George Osborne and others, did any of them try to make any visceral argument in favour of what it means to act together as a continent, to espouse collective values that set us apart from other parts of the world, that there is safety in numbers, that by acting together we are safer and stronger together? No. Once again, it was a debate purely kind of conducted as if it was a kind of endless exchange of statistics. One expert saying this, the other expert saying that, and you still have it. You read any of the British newspapers, listen to any of the radio political shows in the kind of political elite and media in this country, it's all still as if it's just a sort of pounds and pence cost-benefit analysis. And I think that just dramatically misses the point. My own view, I'm not an economist, is that it is undoubtedly better for the United Kingdom, given that we're such an open economy, to remain part of what is the world's most accomplished, most complete, borderless marketplace of 500 million consumers. But you know, much though I'm convinced of that, the thing that makes me believe that it is so important for us to retain rather than abandon our European vocation is because I think to be European does set us apart from what it is to be American or Chinese or Brazilian. I think there are great cultural and political and constitutional traditions of human rights, of democracy, of a balance of powers, which were born in our continent, which I think we, as a country, have shaped, and which in many ways is enshrined by the act of European integration right now. I cannot think of a single major challenge which will face my kids as they grow up, whether it is cross-border crime, whether it's the wild gyrations of global capitalism, whether it's environmental degradation, whether it's mass migration, whether it's extremism, whether it's the advent of artificial intelligence. I can't think of one major change which does not require supranational responses in which you act together to do more together than you could possibly do on your own. In other words, for me, to be a European isn't just a question of claim and counterclaim about whether something will be marginally more expensive or not, or whether inflation might tick up a bit or tick a bit down, or whether GDP might go up fractionally or go down fractionally. It's about who we are in a footloose, fancy-free, globalized world where so many, if not all, of the powerful forces that will shape our world and continue to do so can only be influenced or controlled or mastered if you act together with others. And so I guess my first point to you is that I get the impression that a lot of younger people who feel distressed about the Brexit vote, I think that they see much, much more clearly than many of their older peers that to be part of the European Union isn't just a blip on an economist's graph. It's about who we are. Are we open? Are we closed? Do we embrace the world or do we shun it? Do we embrace diversity or are we fearful of it? Do we try and master change or do we shirk from it? And that is why I think for you, for all of us, not giving up, not just shrugging our shoulders and saying, oh, well, hey-ho, you know, Michael Gove and Nigel Farage and Paul Dacre and all these ghastly people, they've won, there's nothing we can do about it. No, we must fight for a set of values and for a sense of identity, which I think is very precious to us. Two other quicker points. I was asked earlier by a couple of you came to talk to me about whether I thought younger voters, particularly but not exclusively folk active at university and so on, could do anything about it anymore. And all I would impress upon you is that you perhaps have more power in your hands than you might imagine. I mean, just imagine for a minute, if this summer, as it becomes clear what the threadbare deal is and what it includes, or more importantly, what it doesn't include, that has been cobbled together between David Davis and Michel Barnier, and as the country limbers up for this great, important, pivotal moment in our parliamentary democracy when MPs come to vote on that deal in October or November, just imagine the impact it'll have on those MPs and on the public generally if there were demonstrations up and down the country in every town and city with thousands of young voters just saying, you know, not in our name, not in my name. Don't do this. It's not what we want. We have to live with the consequences of what you're doing. You MPs, you represent us. You don't just represent your constituencies as they are today, but also what they are in the future. And the future does not want the vision of Brexit you're imposing upon us. I think that would have a very, very powerful effect indeed. I think you need to be a pretty stubborn, boneheaded politician, not to stop and pause for thought as you're deciding how to cast your vote in that fateful vote later this year. If you had ringing in your ears the voice of young voters saying, we don't want this, don't frog march us to a future that we don't want. And so, in as much as any of you are active in different political parties or different campaign groups, but are united at least on this issue, I would strongly, strongly urge you not to subside into a sense of sort of passivity and, oh, well, it's done, it's dusted. The vested interests in, you know, the British sort of political media establishment have basically kind of won the day. It's a naff thing to say, but it is your future. You have every right to shape it, much more so than anyone else, but just make sure that your voice is raised as loudly and fiercely as you possibly can in the next few crucial months. They really might be some of the most crucial, pivotal months to the long-term future of this country than has been the case at almost any point in the post-war period. And that really brings me, if you like, a little bit to the mechanics of a subject of my book on how to stop Brexit. I don't see, unless one of you explains to me otherwise, I don't see any route out of this cul-de-sac which doesn't finish, but doesn't start with MPs saying to the government in October and November this year, well, thank you for presenting us with this Brexit deal, but we're going to withhold our consent from it. I can't predict to you exactly what happened afterwards, because obviously there'll be a lot of political turmoil. Who knows what would happen to the government, or whether Theresa May would would continue to be Prime Minister or not, whether there'll be a general election. All of that I can't really, my crystal ball is no clearer than anybody else. But I can tell you this, which is that if MPs vote for the deal, and we continue to drift towards this sort of sword of Damocles date on the 29th of March 2019, beyond which we are legally no longer a member of the European Union, I really do think we will be passing a point of no return. And so that is why I, in that book and in other things that I do and say, I don't actually spend that much time speculating endlessly about whether and in what circumstances and in what time and what point in the future we might have a referendum or another referendum, because I kind of think that's probably the end of the process. I mean, ultimately, yes, of course you can't countermand a decision taken by the British people, other than by way of another decision of the British people. But you can't get there's no chance of getting there in the first place unless MPs pluck up the courage to do what the vast majority of MPs in their heart of hearts know to be right for the country, right for their constituents, and say no to the British government. And it seems to me they have every single democratic right to do so. I mean, much though we're constantly being told by particularly sort of Brexiteers on the right that somehow the referendum has arrested and stopped the normal functioning of a representative parliamentary democracy. We do still live in a representative parliamentary democracy. MPs still do have a job to try and represent their constituents to the best of their ability and to the best of their judgment too. Otherwise, what's the point of holding a vote if MPs are not allowed to exercise judgment before casting their vote either for or against the deal? And it seems to me, and by the way, I should say this, mindful as I am, of course, of being a Deputy Prime Minister, shouldn't get ahead of myself. However, retrospectively, I might do so. Mindful, of course, as I am, being a politician who was widely condemned and ripped limb from limb for failing to deliver one policy area on tuition fees in one area when I didn't even win the election and all the rest of it. These people haven't delivered and won't deliver a single one of a whole menu of commitments they made to the British people. Brexit wasn't just, people didn't just vote for Brexit because it's a short little word. It came attached to it, came a bunch of very specific commitments. Most notoriously, of course, plastered on that bus, £350 million extra per week for the NHS, but a whole bunch of other things as well. And I heard these repeated to me constantly by voters who were quite understandably beguiled and attracted by them at the time of the referendum. Not just more money for the NHS, but smaller class sizes, lower prescription charges, a VAT cut, complete control over who comes in and leaves this country. These were the things which animated the pro-Brexit argument. These were the commitments, these were the legitimate expectations that millions of voters had. And I safely predict to you that it won't even be a case of the Brexiteers failing to deliver some of those commitments. They won't deliver a single one of them. So they have sold a proposition, Brexit, on a long, long list of false propositions. And it seems to me, in that context, whether an MP is for Brexit or against Brexit, represents a constituency which was in favour of Brexit or not, it seems to me it is a democratic duty. It's barely even a choice. It's a solemn democratic duty in a representative democracy at that point for MPs to say, thank you, Theresa May, thank you, David Davis, for showing us the fruits of your hard work after all these negotiations over the last couple of years. But on behalf of my constituents, I have to say to you, they legitimately expect that the deal will include this cornucopia of new goodies that you said would come with Brexit. Some of them I mentioned, other ones. That there would be a whole raft of new trade deals, apparently, which we would effortlessly have provided to us. From everyone from the United States to Papua New Guinea, apparently, would give us trade deals which would far outweigh any lost trade in our own doorstep in Europe. And apparently all this was going to happen within a matter of months. We weren't going to have to pay for any of this. We were going to be free of any influence of the European court, European law, and so on. Anyway, it seems to me at that point it is, as I say, not an option, not a choice, but a duty of MPs to say, on behalf of my constituents, I am going to withhold my consent because you have failed to deliver on any of the legitimate expectations which you raised in their hearts at the time of the referendum. And that's the focus of my best-selling book, available at a very decent knockdown price in all retail outlets right now, which is to really focus people's attention on that crucial vote this winter. And I will finish with this. I was an MP, as was said at the outset, for 12 years, and I voted in, participated in many crucial, important votes, from sort of military action in Libya to, I remember when I first arrived, there was a momentous vote on whether, at the time, the Labour government wanted to introduce 90 days detention without trial. These come along from time to time, these votes, where, like a sort of invisible dust that settles on the Palace of Westminster, where as an MP you are aware that how you vote, unlike most humdrum votes, it's a kind of vote that you're going to have to carry in your conscience forever. It's a vote where you kind of know that what you do isn't just about whether you satisfy the whips or whether you do whatever newspaper headline screams at you should do, or even whether you do it in a way that people will be universally happy or not in your constituency. It happens from time to time. You get these votes, big votes, where you feel there's issues of conscience and long-term national interest at play. So I've been in a number of those votes, but I have to say to you, in the time I was in Parliament, I've never participated in a vote which will carry the significance and the enormity in importance that this vote will carry in October and November. So I'm a little bit more optimistic than many people are, that actually a lot of decent men and women in all parties will kind of ignore what their leadership say and what the whips say and what the kind of internal political dynamics dictate, and that they will actually seek to act for the long term, for their children, for their grandchildren, for what's right for the country. And if they do so, I believe it is possible to stop Brexit, and as the rest of the title on the front page of my book says, we will then, in my view, be able to make Britain great again. Thank you very much. Is that the timing all right?
Yeah, perfect. So we'll talk for 10 minutes and then we'll open it up. Nick has allowed us lots of time for questions and discussion. So if I may, what I'm going to do is ask Nick questions for about 10 minutes or so myself, and then we'll open it up to all of you. Nick, you finished by talking about the importance, the huge importance of the vote in Parliament in October or November. There's been a lot of discussion at Westminster about the need for a meaningful vote. What, in your view, would be a meaningful vote? Is it something more than, these are the negotiated terms of the deal, do you accept or reject them, yes or no? And if parliamentarians vote no, what do you think would happen next?
So, the most meaningful vote would include two crucial elements. Not only the detail of the provisions governing Britain's extrication from the European Union, some of which, though not all of which, have been outlined to us already. In other words, the provisions governing the rights of UK citizens in the EU and EU citizens here, the financial arrangements, and the Irish border question. That one, by the way, is the least resolved and the most fudged at the moment. So that's one component. In other words, that's the, how do you kind of pull out of the thing? But then, in my view, any meaningful vote can only be meaningful if it is then accompanied by the second element, which is a detailed description of what comes next. Yeah. Otherwise, you're asking MPs simply to vote on half a loaf. And you can't have a meaningful vote if you're only being asked to vote on, how to leave now without knowing what it means in terms of the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union for years to come. And that's why I think it's very important that MPs, and I certainly, speaking to them, or those who are interested in listening to my views on this, I certainly urge them to be much tougher on the government, to say that they cannot reasonably ask a parliament to sign off the future of our country if they're not given a detailed description of what that future holds. Now, David Davis, the ever self-confident and ebullient, not a man prone to self-doubt, Brexit secretary has said, I think yesterday, that he believes all the substantial details of the future relationship between the UK and the EU will be settled before we legally leave, and by implication will be available to MPs before the vote. I think that is complete pie in the sky. I mean, it's complete nonsense, this idea that all the T's will be crossed and I's will be dotted in the next 8 months. So one of the many crunch decisions MPs will need to take is whether they should basically refuse to vote at all if they're not able to vote meaningfully on the future approach to the European Union. I hope they'll be courageous on this. It seems to me, as I said earlier, I think on behalf of their constituents, having secured this right on a meaningful vote, it would be right for MPs then to insist that the content of that meaningful vote is met in full by government. What happens if they vote against? I mean, I really find it very difficult to predict. All sorts of things could happen. You could, I suppose, to get out of what would then be a very tight corner for the government, they could suddenly sort of throw out the idea of having a referendum on the deal as a sort of concession, if you like, to try and stay in power. I don't know, maybe Theresa May would fall on her sword, and I don't know, you'd have Prime Minister Hammond or Johnson or whatever ghastly variant. All these things could happen. I suppose you could possibly have a general election. I don't know. I mean, I really find it very predictable. You will get political turmoil, but the one thing, by the way, which you will not get, which is what the right-wing newspapers and the Brexiteers keep saying, is that if Parliament were to withhold its consent, this is the line being promulgated by Number 10, then MPs would be condemning the United Kingdom to a sort of legal chaos and legal limbo, because the timetable set out in Article 50, this famous 2-year timetable, the clock would continue to tick, and it means we would then be expelled or expelling ourselves in a disorderly fashion without idea. It's complete rubbish. I've spoken to several European prime ministers, deputy prime ministers, foreign ministers and others, and they all say, well, listen, if you guys start having second thoughts, or your parliament on behalf of people start having second thoughts, we're not going to force you over the edge of a cliff while you're still making up your mind. One way or another, the pause button will be pushed, and time would be afforded to the United Kingdom to try and find our feet. But there'll be a lot of political turmoil, that's for sure.
You've also mentioned the possibility of a second referendum, and that's been talked about a lot recently, not least by Nigel Farage.
Such a wise man,
yes.
He really is.
If there is a second referendum, what do you think the question should be?
Well, without being sort of pernickety about this, I think the staunchest advocates of a referendum don't and should, or at least shouldn't call it a second referendum, because it's not a second referendum, it's a first referendum.
On the terms.
On the terms, which were not available to us. And by the way, this is not some perfidious wheeze cooked up by, suspicious saboteurs like, me and Anna Subri and Chukra Moon or whoever. The idea of a two-step process was actively advocated for years by the most staunch Brexiteers. I remember reading a long essay from John Redwood, which he's now, surprise, surprise, taken down from his website, setting out in meticulous detail how there should be a sort of double lock, I think he called it, where the British people have the say at the beginning of the process and the end of the process. David Davis has toyed with it in the past. Nigel Farage now thinks it's a good idea. And why did they think it was a good idea? Because there's a material and qualitative difference between saying, yes, we want to leave without really knowing what leave will mean in practice, and then asking people again, when you know what it means in practice, whether they still like it or not.
Yeah. But isn't there a similar risk if the referendum question is to the effect, now that we know the terms, do you, the British people, want to leave the EU on those terms, yes or no? Suppose the vote were to be no, what's the consequence of that? Haven't we then fallen into another enormous black hole?
What if people said...
If they reject...
The deal.
The deal.
Well, then legally, I assume the United Kingdom continues as a current, an ongoing current member of the European... I think you'd have to give a fairly concrete set of alternatives. One is the deal,
yeah,
and what exit means in relation to the single market, the customs union, agriculture and fisheries and immigration, and the other one is, in effect, our current status within the European Union.
So it is remain?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think so, yes.
Yes. In your book, you said that the key political actor in terms of shaping the debate over the next 6 to 9 months is Jeremy Corbyn.
Mm.
There are probably, in this student audience, quite a lot of Corbyn supporters. What's your message to them? They can tell us if they're not. But what's your message to them, and what's your message to Corbyn?
Well, look, I'm not going to make myself popular with the Corbynites amongst you. Let me put it this way. I was, as everyone knows, I was, constant, remorselessly for half a decade, sort of sanctimoniously criticised by the left for betraying progressive values by entering into a coalition with the Conservatives. And yet I think that what Jeremy Corbyn is now clearly intent on doing will represent the greatest betrayal of progressive values in the modern British political era. To vote for a Tory Brexit, which is what he's clearly determined to do, I think would be such a spectacular abandonment of the traditions of internationalism which have underpinned progressive politics in this country for generations. I personally think it is based on an analysis which he clearly holds dear, as lots of slightly sort of old-fashioned socialists from the 70s do, that the kind of European community was a sort of rich man's club and the single market as a sort of libertarian, laissez-faire experiment run by the folk who are now in Davos. I think it's complete bilge. But more than that, I just think it's so dishonest to pretend that you are somehow fighting the Conservatives' interpretation of Brexit, because that's, remember, what's happening. We're not pursuing any old Brexit. We're pursuing a peculiarly and narrowly destructive form of Brexit, in which we don't just leave the political institutions of the EU, we also leave the single market and the customs union. For a Labour Party to support the Conservatives in that endeavour, oh my God! I think that I honestly, I cannot think of any other example in modern political history where you would have such a wholesale abandonment by the left of some of the values which it's traditionally held dear. And that's why I remain of the view that whatever his own rather stubborn and eccentric views about this are, I remain hopeful that a lot of decent men and women in the Labour Party, a party which, remember, whose membership is avowedly pro-European, that lots of Labour MPs will do, what is right for the country. And this claim from the hard left, this, McDonnell and Corbyn and others, that somehow, for instance, trying to aspire to remain a full participant in the customs union and the single market is impossible. It's done by other countries who aren't part of the European Union. I have to say, I'm rather struck because at the moment, and these things happen. I mean, dare I say, this is like going back in ancient history. I was subject to a sort of frothy bubble moment where everyone sort of suddenly thinks you're, the best thing since sliced bread. It happened for a very short period of time, I have to stress. But you've got the whole Corbyn thing is not. It's a personality cult, really, and so he's not really being subject to meaningful scrutiny. What he's doing on Brexit is aiding and abetting a very hard right ideology funded by some very libertarian interests in, and I enumerate the people. Yeah. I literally list the names of this cabal of what is in effect a new Brexit elite, and they tend to be, by the way, older men, rich older men, many of whom don't live in this country, who have very extreme libertarian small state ideological views, and a lot of them made their money in finance and hedge funds, and they fund UKIP, and they fund the Tories. They're media proprietors, Rupert Murdoch, the Barclay brothers, some of them are media editors like Paul Dacre. That is who Corbyn is helping. It's an outrage that he's doing it, and I hope he's stopped.
And for those of you who haven't read the book, there is a 2-3 page passage worthy of the Daily Mail where Nick names the guilty men.
But can I just on that?
Yeah.
Can I just on that? The Brexit campaign was incredibly skilled at saying that they were standing against an elite. And partly, of course, because the main proponent of Remain was someone who has a rather elitist demeanour in David Cameron. It was kind of easy for them to do that. I think one of the many weird and tragic and dishonest twists and turns in all of this is that actually what's happened is we've been subject to something akin to an ideological coup run by an identifiable clique who are a Brexit elite themselves. And it's so important that people understand this, that legitimate, widespread grievance amongst millions of our fellow citizens, particularly in the wake of the 2008 crash, where millions of people, particularly on low and middle incomes, legitimately feel the status quo has served them very badly. That legitimate grievance, widespread popular grievance, has been exploited by an identifiable elite who don't have progressive interests in their mind. And one final thing, just because this is terribly important. If I understand it correctly, Jeremy Corbyn, above and beyond everything else, wants to be Prime Minister of this country to end austerity, whatever that means. That's what he wants. You cannot end austerity and proceed with Brexit. It is impossible. You have to choose. You cannot build a sort of austerity-free progressive Britain if you yank us out of the single market, the customs union, as abruptly as he wants. It is impossible. So I just kind of think the left needs to choose. If you want to deliver the promised land, where everyone can, it's free this, free that, everyone paid for by somebody else, you can't do that and proceed with Brexit. And I really think in the next few months it's important that they are confronted with that choice.
Last question from me. There are those, including people on the left, people like Ed Miliband, who genuinely fear that if they are now seen to obstruct Brexit, there will be riots, especially riots in places like Doncaster. What's your response to that?
Well, it depends entirely on what basis you are seeking to allow the country to think again. And as I described earlier, the idea that you have a referendum, one on false pretenses, with a very narrow vote, against the wishes of those who have to bear the consequences of it, and then to be told, and don't you dare revisit this, otherwise we'll beat you up. That is an appalling message. I mean, what damage does that do to democracy? As David Davis famously said, I put it in the front page one of my book, a democracy that no longer can change its mind ceases to be democracy. Why do we hold elections every few years? Why do you guys change your minds? I'll support this person this time, that person. Because a democracy is a living, breathing thing. Democracy didn't stop in the summer of 2016. And I really worry about people who start saying, whoa, we can't possibly move with the times, because otherwise people are going to start, burning cars on the streets. we have to have more faith in our ability as a democratic society to do what it seems to me is at the heart of a democracy. It's an ability to look anew at things, to evolve, to change, as new facts come into view, to then react to them. I, oddly enough, think that assertion, that chills me much, much more than the, if that's what Ed Miliband is saying, than the assertion that somehow some very unhappy folk will. I mean, I might as well go around and start saying I'm going to start lighting, torching cars if they've. I mean, we cannot collapse into that. We have to, as a democracy, continue to believe that we are free, and it is a freedom which is essential to any small L, small d liberal democracy, to think again.
Now, let's open it up.
My name is Abdulaziz Kilani, and I am representing an Arabic electronic newspaper named East and West. My question is, what would be the economic impact of Brexit to young people in Britain?
Thank you. And pass the mic back. And then you, sir, with the beard. Yes. Tell us your name.
Hi, I'm Ronan. I've just finished university and started working in the city. Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, I was a bit zoned out there. I was paying too much attention to the gentleman's question over there. No, so my question was, how can we hope to achieve the disruption in the meaningful vote on Brexit towards the end of the year that you've described, when quite a lot of the more moderate MPs known for voting with their conscience lost their often marginal seats in the most recent general election?
Thank you. And then the lady over here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm from London. And my question is, why is nobody pointing out that only a minority of referendum voters favoured a hard Brexit?
So on the economics, look, I'm not the right person, and I don't think it's the right setting to sort of try and expand on all the different facets of the disruption that will be caused. I would just observe, however, that we haven't even left the European Union, and the vast, vast, vast majority of authoritative economic analyses show there's already considerable damage which has been incurred by the British economy. We have, in a spectacularly short period of time, declined from being the fastest growing G7 economy to the slowest. Independent analyses, ironically enough, I think the Financial Times crunched the numbers recently, have estimated that right now, before we've even left, they have quantified the cost per week to the British economy to be, ironically enough, £350 million per week. And that's before we've even left. And all I would say is this. There are a bunch of Brits who were incredibly key in creating what, in many respects, remains the most ambitious and astonishing achievement of European integration, and that was the single market. It was an idea, actually first in many ways worked on by Lord Cockfield, who was then the British Commissioner in the European Commission, a Labour man, quite a sort of punctilious sort of accountant really, and he worked with a French socialist, Jacques Delors, who sold it to a British Tory, Margaret Thatcher. And so in this unusual ideological constellation, they agreed to do something which no other part of the world has ever done before or since. And they recognized that if you really want to get the most out of trade in countries that are sort of jostling geographically next to each other, because let's remember, I mean, I know it sounds a rather silly thing to emphasize, but if you listen to people like Liam Fox and Nigel Farage and others, you'd think, I think they believe that they've abolished geography. That somehow we can effortlessly trade with New Zealand as much as we can with Ireland. No, we can't. They're on the other side of the planet. We're not going to be towed tectonically to a different hemisphere on the 29th of March 2000. We are condemned geologically and tectonically to be a European country. There's a reason, by the way, why we trade so much more with Little Ireland than we do with China and India combined. Because they're right next door. Economists have estimated, roughly speaking, that for every distance doubled, sort of mile doubled in distance between two economies, the amount of trade between them halves. Geography remains, proximity remains probably, even in this globalized, digitalized world of ours, the single biggest determinant for how communities trade with each other. And what they recognized was that if you want to really get the best in this cluttered economy, continent of ours, with all these countries, this patchwork of different countries, large and small, living cheek by jowl, the best way to do it is not just to remove the old-fashioned impediments to trade, the taxes, the levies, the so-called tariffs. That was the old-fashioned problem of trade. What they recognized, in my view, in a very far-sighted manner, was that if you really want effortless trade, so it is easy to sell your goods and services from London to Lisbon as it is London to Liverpool, you've got to not just get rid of the taxes, the tariffs, you also have to get rid of all the red tape and the qualifications and the certifications and the licensing requirements and the rules and all the rest of it, and in a sense, replace now, with 28 members, 28 bits of red tape with one bit of red tape, right? That was the genius of the single market. And it was a British, in many respects, a British invention. And boy, have we made the most of that as a country. It is all the evidence shows, it has massively boosted competitiveness, employment, export opportunities. I mean, so much so that in industries like the car industry, these poor Japanese manufacturers, they were invited into this country in the 1980s. Invited in. The red carpet was rolled out on the explicit promise that if they built great big factories, as they did in Derby and Sunderland and elsewhere, they could create these what they call supply chains, where widgets could be made in Belgium, shipped over here, put into a car, then it could be sent off to Germany and so on, right? So we created this totally integrated economic ecosystem. I just think it defies all logic that you unplug yourself from that after 4 decades, given how incredibly open our economy is, without very significant economic damage. And I find so much of the economic debate at the moment so facile, because people sort of, oh, last week the statistics were bad and now they're a bit better. That proves this, that proves that. It is a total change in the kind of macroeconomic design of our economy. And the idea that you could do that without causing disruption, I think, defies logic. So I'm afraid I think the economic impact will be quite great. No. Of course, a bunch of people lost their seats, including myself. Thank you for reminding me. But there are lots of very decent people in the House of Commons from all parties who I hope and believe actually will think really long and hard about their kind of wider duty, towards the country in the vote in autumn and winter. You almost imply that all nice people left at the last election, and no, that's not the case. There are some left. I think as a proportion of the electorate, those who voted for Brexit, unspecified, because it was unspecified in the summer of 2006, is about, 36% of the total electorate. So, it's very important to remember, A, it was a very narrowly fought contest. There's only 650,000 votes in it. B, the overwhelming majority of, in a sense, the most important voters, the young voters, voted the other way. But C, statistically, it's just simply not the case that the majority of the British people voted for Brexit. And as I often remind Brexiteers when they say 17.4 million people voted for Brexit, that's the biggest popular vote, 16.1 million voters, that was the losing side. 16.1 million votes is more votes than any winning government has ever won as a single party, in a single party victory in the modern era. So the losing side of this referendum actually represented far more people in the country than elect and have elected winning governments. And as you quite rightly implied, there was almost no debate. I mean, I've met so many people since the referendum who've, with hindsight, had to work out for themselves what is the difference between a free trade agreement and a single market, between a single market and a customs union and so on. All this lexicon of stuff that we're now told by the Brexiteers was apparently all explained with crystal clarity in the referendum. Actually, much of it, we've had to educate ourselves as a country after the event. I mean, famously, I think, Google said that there was this sharp spike on their search engine literally the hours after the referendum and the question was, what is the European Union? So I agree with you. I just think the way in which history has been rewritten, the way history has been rewritten, and I'm afraid in politics, the victors can often seek to rewrite history, and that's exactly what they're trying to do on this occasion as well.
Time for the next round. So, Lily, the two hands nearest you, the lady in the second row, and wait for your question, but when you've asked it, pass it to the gentleman just behind you. And we've got a microphone there, and over here in the third row, the man with his hand up in the middle. And then could you, sir, when you've asked your question, pass the mic back that way to the gentleman at the end? Very good. So, yes, you, madam.
Hi, my name's Vita. I'm from the LSE doing a master's, but I'm also Polish. And I am not a British citizen because I don't have £1,500 to spend on a passport, tuition fees and all that. Anyway. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I do apologise. Anyway, so I didn't have a vote. I didn't have a say of what's going to happen to my future, despite being in this country for 15 years. What do I say to people in my community, especially children, when they ask me, are we going to get deported after Brexit?
Yep.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's David.
So where are you?
I'm right at the front. Hello. Hi, yeah, my name's David. I'm an economist. I was at a parliamentary event yesterday, Nicky Morgan and Frank Field. Several people, they all seem to be in agreement with three ideas that most British people want us now to just get on with it, get on with leaving. We can still cooperate in things like the OECD on major initiatives, and actually, maybe this is a good opportunity to have a renaissance in policy. Do you have any sympathy with those ideas? Is there anything in that for you?
Mm-hmm. And then you, sir. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My name is Philip, and I studied here democracy and competitive politics last year as a master. And my question is, so a lot of people speak about a proxy vote, that people voted not to leave the European Union, but to tell people that felt ignored, that promises were not kept by politicians. And I think if politicians have the right to change their mind, like you said, but I think politicians need to kind of say sorry to the public for all those lies, and also kind of think back what they did wrong, to pick the public up again and to say, okay, we made a mistake together. Because I think often the public says, oh, actually I voted wrong. There are like people who didn't know what they voted for. And they say, oh, I made a mistake. I haven't heard it from any politician so far.
So, look, I don't ever think there was, and I say this obviously as someone who's got a Dutch mum, who, I mean, you say you didn't vote. My poor mum, who's 82 now, she's lived here for 50 years. She's raised 4 children. She worked as a teacher of children with learning difficulties. She's paid her taxes, and she was given absolutely no say at all, none, about what happened to the country that she's given so much to, which she's lived in for half a century and so on. And of course, we had this very peculiar thing that she didn't get a vote, but someone who turned up from the Antipodes, from the other side of the world, very recently did. So it was a very odd interpretation of the sort of mandate of who did and didn't have the right to vote. But so I very much kind of understand your concerns, but I have never thought that the likelihood or the risk is that you're going to be evicted and you're going to be sort of, put in a sort of cattle cart and shipped off to Dover and told to go back home. I don't think that's the problem you're going to face. I suspect what you are going to face is not a prohibition on living here. I think you'll just face more hassle. I just think it's going to be just hassle. You can't quit the European Union, tear up the legal conventions surrounding EU citizenship, abdicate ourselves from the principle of freedom of movement without introducing significant new bureaucracy and red tape in terms of residency tests and all the rest of it. And so I think your answer, in a sense, to your community, since you asked, is that I think it's going to be a lot more form-filling and a lot more bureaucracy and a lot more red tape, which is ironic, of course, because one of the many, many things that we were all promised by Brexit is we would finally be liberated from the clutches of these, awful foreigners in Brussels who smother us in red tape, and we were going to be able to live the free life of plucky British islanders, free of all of that continental bureaucracy. And in fact, Brexit is going to usher in a tsunami wave of bureaucracy and red tape, the likes of which we have not seen for a long period. I mean, if you think that's bad, wait to see what it's going to be like for goods coming in and out of this country if we're out of the customs union. It's going to be a monstrously bureaucratic thing. Well, here is the sort of terrible irony. The reason, I mean, look, why did 17.4 million people vote for Brexit? No one has the all-encompassing answer, because people voted for different reasons. I'll tell you, I played no role and didn't seek to, and it would have been inappropriate for me to do so in the national referendum campaign in June 2016. So I only concentrated on the campaign in South Yorkshire and Sheffield at the time. And I remember one general thing and one specific thing, which is relevant to your question. Firstly, probably the most commonly cited reason why people wanted to vote for Brexit, I met hundreds, thousands of Brexit voters, was because they were fed up that Sheffield was being told what to do by London. So a vote against Brussels was used as a proxy to poke London in the eye. The second thing is this. I remember on the Wednesday night, about 6:30 in the evening, the evening before the referendum on the Thursday, myself and some other friends of mine and some fellow campaigners, we sort of strategically located ourselves with balloons and leaflets and heaven knows what else, on a street corner in a particularly busy part of my then constituency where lots of commuters were going back home. And I'll never forget the very big burly chap who I knew. He was a big guy, great tattoos on his arm and stuff, and I knew him because I'd helped his daughter, who had some problems at school, get to another school. So we were very well disposed to each other, and he crossed the street and cheerily greeted me. I said, "Oh, hi, how are you going to vote tomorrow?" And he said, "Oh, I'm going to vote Brexit." I said, "Oh, you don't want to do that." By the way, the first thing he said was, "Oh, don't worry, you're going to win anyway," which I think was the expectation of a lot of people. But then he said to me something which I've never forgotten. He said, "Look, Nick," and he was a self-employed builder, and he said, "Listen, Nick, I am working longer hours than I ever have done. I'm working every hour God gives me, and yet the last 8 years, every month, every year, I'm taking a little bit less money home. Because you politicians screwed up. The regulators screwed up. The bankers screwed up. None of them are suffering." And his rage that for reasons which were entirely, but nothing to do with him, he and his family were suffering every month, every week, every month, a little bit less money for his kids, for his elderly parents. And he said to me, "Nick, you can't expect me to tick a box saying remain, as if everything should remain the same. I'm completely fed up with this." Now, I could have tried to argue, as I believe, that actually Brexit's going to make life particularly harder for people on low and middle incomes. And the awful, agonizing injustice of this is that after many years in which wages grew less fast than prices in the shops, in other words, there was a real-term squeeze on people's take-home pay, which had gone on remorselessly for 8 long years after the 2008 crash, on a scale and for a length of time never seen before on record, in the records in this country since the industrial era. The agonizing thing was it was just changing in the months running up to the referendum. In other words, for the first time in years, finally, there was light at the end of the tunnel, and lots of working families were getting higher pay increases exceeding the increase in prices in the shops. And guess what? The first things happened straight after the referendum. It switched right back. And so I could have tried to explain that to him, but emotionally, I knew there was no way I was going to get through to him because he was legitimately enraged that this 2008 crash and everything that happened in its wake, he was suffering, it wasn't his fault, and he wasn't going to vote for the status quo for that reason. And so, in answer to your question, yes, of course, what this country desperately needs is an eruption in policy creativity to work out how on earth we can build more homes. Why is it government after government after government, including mine, haven't built enough affordable homes? Why is it that pay progression hasn't been going up in the way that it has? How do we overcome this awful, debilitating sort of snobbery in favour of academic qualifications rather than vocational qualifications in the way in which we skill and train our youngsters? All sorts of stuff. But we're not going to do that because we're going to spend years and years and years tied up in knots just trying to get out of this wretched club. And I tell you, I've seen this for myself. A government is like anything else. There's only so much you can do in a day, right? The idea, Whitehall, there's only so much that you can ask of government at Whitehall. There's only so much you can ask of politicians. I know politicians are considered not to be human, but they are actually human. And there's a limit to what they can do. And this is the great awful thing, is instead of actually being an opportunity for renewal and policy creativity and all that crap that Frank Field says, actually it is going to be a massive, massive distraction and displacement exercise from the things we really should be getting on with in this country. I apologise. In fact, not a good it did me. So I'm not entirely sure whether I can give you a good example. Should people apologise when they can't? Of course they should when they make mistakes. Everyone should, and people do, and so on. I think what you're hinting at is to ask people who voted a particular way, what does it take for someone to say, oh, I've made a mistake? I'm not asking that builder I talked about earlier to say, oh, I made a mistake, oh, woe is me, I screwed up. I'm not asking him to do that at all. All I'm asking of him, and what I'd like people to ask millions of folk across the country, is to say, look, has it really turned out the way that you thought it did? And actually, the opinion polls, by the way, while they don't show much movement in the headline response to sort of how would you vote, actually there's huge change now in public perception of that it's much more complicated than they were led to believe, much more drawn out, and much more costly. And so I think you shouldn't say to the public, admit you're wrong. That's not, I don't actually believe that. 70.4 million people and lots of really decent, good people with perfectly good intentions voted for something which I disagree with, but I'm not going to sort of denigrate them for it. I'm not going to say they're sort of stupid or anything, far from it. I can totally understand why they did. The thing to say now is that now, in 2018 and 2019, we know so much more about what it really means in practice. And that's why now I think it's right to say to those voters, they have the right, not to sort of say, to apologise for getting it wrong, but to have the right to think again.
Let's have hands. Yes, the lady here in the third row. Could we have a mic to her? Thanks, Jenna. And we had a gentleman on the end. You have the first question, sir. Yeah, tell us who you are.
Hello. Oh, wow, that was loud. Hello, my name's Aidan from Newcastle. I'm a student of history. I was wondering if I might draw you into a counterfactual historical discussion, if you like.
Keep it quick and
very
come to a
quick.
question.
It'll be brief. At the moment of, I believe you called your frothing popularity in 2010, had you chosen to go with the other route and chosen Mr. Brown's government, do you think we still be in the situation we are, or do you think it would have been the pressure for Brexit would have carried along regardless?
Thank you. Yes.
My name's Livy, I'm a UCL student. I was just wondering...
So where are you?
In the third row.
Given a second referendum, what do you think is the feasibility of government being able to set out a clear and open Brexit deal, given that we've already established that people were quite easily misled by politics on people didn't really know what they were necessarily voting for in a simple yes or no, and people were quite generally confused by political lexicon. How do you think we go about making sure people actually understand this deal?
Thank you. And then you, sir. Yes.
My name's Charlie, I'm from London. Mr. Macron is trailblazing across Europe at the moment, and he has been making moves towards a more federalised Europe, closer integration, an EU budget and so on. How does that affect the campaign to stay in the EU, the idea of a federalised Europe was obviously quite anathema to a lot of voters. And then what are your thoughts more generally on the president?
Yep. Okay. Can I just ask, by the way, I don't say this, I'm not saying this accusatory or anything, I'm just quite interested, do you think that was an option back in 2010? No, just yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah. So, no. So you're not alone. A lot of people think that. And the interesting thing is, perception is everything in politics. It wasn't an option at all. The combination of the Liberal Democrats and Labour was, I think, 11 seats short of a majority. It would not have been possible to form a government. It wasn't arithmetically possible. It wasn't a question of sort of, like plucking petals from a daisy. Do I go with Gordon? Do I go with Dave? And I'm sort of amazed because the facts were so clear at the time. The only combination that could create the majority necessary to sustain a government was between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. So the choice wasn't. I mean, Gordon, I talked to him at the time, he at one point had this, I thought, very foolish idea, which didn't stand up to any scrutiny. No one, by the way, in his own team thought it was viable, of a sort of rainbow coalition where it's Liberal Democrats, Labour, Plaid, the SNP, the Green. It completely would have collapsed within a week. And no one who looked at it seriously, and boy, I tell you, having tried to make a two-party coalition work for 5 years, the idea that this sort of motley crew of kind of flotsam and jetsam would work, and no one in his inner circle thought it was. And in fact, I remember talking to Gordon Brown at the moment, and he was saying, "Oh, Nick, I remember he got out this pen. He said we've got one Plaid and one this, one this." I remember saying, "Gordon, put away your pen. Look at the telly." Because on the telly, there was John Reid, David Blunkett, and everyone saying, Labour must go into opposition, there is no viable route for Labour to go into government. See, it wasn't even an option, right? So the Liberal Democrats did not say, we'll go with the Tories now and we'll shun Labour. Actually, the choice was much more primitive, which was, were we going to play a role at a time where the country was reeling from the greatest economic shock in the post-war period to create a stable government with a majority where it could actually do stuff, or were we going to say, no, that's all terribly too controversial and complicated, we'll have another election in 6 months' time, or another one after that, and after that. At a time, by the way, I remember this vividly, the election was on the Thursday. I remember our television screens were full of, we talked earlier about burning cars and demonstrations in Athens. There was a feeling that, particularly with the largest peacetime deficit in this country's history, with a massively oversized and totally broken banking system, we were going to be the next domino to fall. And I had calls from Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, and senior denizens of the British establishment saying, please, if you don't form a government, this country, a bit like in the early 1970s, is going to be absolutely massacred in the markets. So the only choice actually was a much more simple one. Did we form the only government which parliamentary arithmetic allowed or not? But it's interesting, that's why I asked you, and I really don't mean it chippily, don't worry, I'm well beyond that now. But it's very, very interesting. On the left in particular, you have this narrative, because the left loves a betrayal narrative, that the Lib Dems, they love it. It's always lurking there. So they simply can't believe that was the fact. But they are the facts. You can look them up for yourself. They have to believe that it was an act of sort of betrayal and perfidy. That's the only way they can compute it. It's just not true. Hope that's clear. Look, your question begs a much, much bigger thing about the quality of our democracy, the quality of debate. How do you make sure that an election is a properly informed election? Democracies are not perfect. I've fought lots and lots and lots of elections in the last 2 decades. They're random, weird, freewheeling things, right? They're not a university seminar. They're a much, much rougher, tougher business than that. That's what democracy is. We shouldn't over-idealize or over-romanticize democracy. You're never going to get a perfectly objective, administered, well-informed debate. Of course not. But actually, oddly enough, I also kind of think that despite all of that, people are remarkably smart, sort of intuitively, about the choices that face them. So I think my answer is, it is always imperfect. Yes, of course it is. It's always imperfect. I tell you what, though, a choice which presents the British people with, here is, in concrete terms, what membership means, and here is what exit would mean in concrete terms, is already a much richer debate than, hey, should we leave? Because we kind of feel like it on a Thursday afternoon in June, without any, with all that blah, 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 this utopian sort of nonsense that the Brexiteers spout. So you'd already have a much more grounded and anchored debate, but it'll never be a perfect one. But I certainly think it would be a more informed one than the one we had in June 2016. Macron and everything. Look, this is a much bigger subject. My own view has always been, and Macron, and I've spoken to him about this very briefly some time ago, and he hinted at this in this big speech he gave about the future of Europe, where he set out his plan, particularly for greater integration in the Eurozone. I've always felt that in the long run, if you look at the sort of grand sweep of history, one of the fundamental tensions for us Brits is that we are by far the largest economy in the European Union, which is not in the Eurozone. And that does, and I think you have to be open about this, that does create really difficult tensions, because it means that you create a dynamic of integration, of federalisation, if I can put it like that, in the Eurozone. And Macron, in my view, is quite right, that to stabilise the Eurozone, you have to move from monetary union to basically fiscal and economic union, and that's a whole, it's about banking union and deposit guarantee schemes and fiscal transfers and, euro bonds and all sorts of complex stuff. But the basic idea is you can't have a single interest rate in an area if you don't also have a mechanism by which you can shift money around the place to deal with the weaker bits of the monetary union and deal with some of the liabilities in the banking system and so on. I think he's right. We will not be part of that, right? Even if we continue to be part of the European Union. And I actually think there's an opportunity there. Because as the Eurozone becomes a more consolidated, sort of federated union, if I can put it like that, oddly enough, I think it should make it more comfortable for a country like the United Kingdom to be in the overall architecture of the European Union, but not in those core undertakings. And by the way, that's where we were headed anyway. We're not part of Schengen. We're not part of the currency union. We'd carved out all sorts of exceptions for us as a country on social policy, foreign policy, defence policy, and all sorts of other things. So we were already, oddly enough, having our cake and eating it. We were part of the core undertakings of the single market, the customs union. We were playing a leadership role, particularly on foreign policy, defence, and internal security. But I think in a strange kind of way, the more the Eurozone sorts itself out, and particularly these imbalances between the creditor north and the debtor south, in a strange kind of way, the relationship between the United Kingdom, being outside the Eurozone and the rest, could have been more easily settled. And that's why Macron in that speech said, look, his vision is for a fiscal and economic union built around the Eurozone, obviously built around the kind of Franco-German duopoly. And he was sort of saying, hopefully that will give more space for other more ambivalent countries like the United Kingdom to feel more comfortable in the European club.
Now, we're probably coming into the last round, and forgive me, I've been favouring people in the front. I've also, without intending it, been favouring men over women. So this is going to be a ladies' round. Gentlemen, lower your hands, please.
So that bloke at the back, you don't stand any chance, sorry.
And Lily, there's a lady there with her hand up. Pass the mic to her, please. And Jenna, can you find a lady in the middle somewhere? Any ladies in this part of the hall who want to ask a question, please? Hands up. And we've got some ladies down here. Paula, can you bring the microphone? Oh, no, Paula, a lady at the back in red. That's the one. And no ladies, a lady right at the back in white. So, Jenna, if you could take the mic right up to the lady nearly at the back in white. So let's start over here. I've lost my questioner.
Yeah.
There she is. Yeah, far away.
Hi.
Tell us who you are.
My name's Hannah, I'm from Oxford. My friends want me to ask about Carly Rae Jepsen, but I won't. My question is, how do you think the Irish border question will be resolved? Because obviously the government's own positions are totally incompatible with each other, but it does obviously need to be resolved when we leave.
Okay, that's a big one. Hold it. Lady in white, have you got a mic? Not yet. Please, could someone...
The lady in red does.
Yes, let's have the lady in red.
Hello, good evening, and thank you very much for coming down tonight. I think it's wonderful and brave of you to come and face an audience with over £10 million in debt over policies that failed us, and with more policies that are going to fail us. Okay.
Start here.
With policies that might fail us in the future, which means our repayment of the loans might be difficult, job prospects being a bit scarce, with JP Morgan announcing a loss of over 4,000 jobs today, actually. So my question to you is, are there any actionable plans, anything that you're proposing, anything that you're leading to stop Brexit, or maybe work completely opposite and get us a better deal out of Brexit? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last question, Jenna. There's a lady in white right at the back. Could we take the mic up to her? Put your hand up, please. That's it. Yes, and tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Roshi and I did public policy last year. My question was actually related to the Irish border as well, but I was going to ask, do you think having the DUP in government is actually going to help stop Brexit, considering that we had, or at least soften it, considering that they secured a deal for no border, kind of north-south or east-west?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last bit.
Just after the end of the last talks, they promised that there wouldn't be a border north-south or east-west. Do you think that that would, between England and Ireland, do you think that that would help soften the Brexit?
Right. Sorry, to the lady there, to be honest, if the question is what my thoughts about how to stop Brexit, I've written a whole book about it and sort of tried to go on. Well, so on the Irish border question, I mean, I think I'll come back to you. The Irish border question, I think it has the potential to really have an unravelling effect on everything, because there is no answer to it. You can't have a border and not have a border. And that's the fundamental sort of lie and contradiction at the heart of the government's approach. They say that, so it's very important to remember this, one of the most powerful refrains of the Brexit campaign was that that by leaving the European Union, the British people would have control over our borders. I heard this actually a lot on the campaign trail. Want to leave the European Union to take control back over our borders. So it's quite interesting to reflect on what's happened, because it has a direct bearing on the questions you asked about Ireland. We have now, consequent to the Brexit referendum, we're now creating a border which previously didn't exist. A land border between the EU and the UK in the island of Ireland. That border did not exist. And those same people who told the British voters that voting for Brexit was the way to assert control over our borders are now falling over themselves to say, oh, but we don't have any control over this new border. Yeah, but you couldn't make it up. So they create a border which didn't previously exist, and then having told people that we should control our borders, are now desperate to say they don't want to touch them. It's absolute madness. And the reason they won't, because they didn't work out that the moment you start pulling at one thread in the delicate balance of power and the delicate trade-offs between the different communities in the Irish peace settlement, you unravel the whole thing. And that's why in December they didn't come up with any solutions. If you're interested in it, you should read the summit conclusions, these EU summit conclusions, where apparently the Irish border problem was solved. I mean, there's literally one paragraph aimed at the DUP in Belfast, saying there'll be no border and no new borders between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. And then there's literally another paragraph sort of aimed at Dublin, sort of saying, and there'll be no borders and no controls north-south in the island of Ireland. Well, you simply cannot leave a customs union, let alone a single market, and not exercise control at a border. It is impossible, because you have to police what they call the common external tariff. So that people are paying the taxes which they're due as they move in and out of that tariff area. You just can't, you certainly can't hold true to the commitment to the British people that you're taking back control of your border if you're basically creating a new border and then just throwing it open like a back door. And anyone can just walk into the United Kingdom from the rest of the EU. So much for taking back control. So the only logical solution is that you stay in the customs union. That's the only logical way in which you can, and that only deals with half the problem, which is the monitoring of the import and export of goods between the UK and the EU. But of course, the DUP will never accept that, which is why this unholy bribe, basically, in which Theresa May has written out a cheque to the DUP to win their votes in Parliament, is such a fateful one, because it means that if she wanted to, and there's no evidence that she does, if she wanted to do the logical thing, which is to keep the United Kingdom in the customs union, amongst other things, to minimise economic disruption, but to sidestep this border issue, she can't, because she's held over a barrel by the DUP. So I don't know where this goes. I really don't know where this goes. Something has to give. She's either going to have to enrage her right wing by abiding by the customs union. The one thing I think is just a nonsense is this stuff you keep hearing from ministers that apparently technology will deal with it. Technology which you won't see, you can't touch, you can't smell. Technology. Ooh. It's unbelievable. That's how facile this has become. So if you ask a minister, if a minister was here, they would literally say to you, technology. And then you're supposed to go, oh, that's right then. So I don't know the answer. So it is in the book. My action plan, since you asked for one, is to do everything and anything possible to maximise pressure on Conservative and Labour MPs to vote down the deal in the autumn and winter. And there are a whole series of suggestions that I make in the book about how you can do that, from elementary stuff, like writing to your MP, emailing them, going to see them, to more dramatic things. I mean, if just one in every 100 Remain voters joined the Conservative Party tomorrow, they would outnumber the current membership of the Conservative Party. If Momentum can basically embark on this entryism in the Labour Party, why can't Remainers do it in the party? So I actually advocate for those people who are that way inclined anyway, inclined to vote for the Conservatives, inclined to vote for Labour. For those of you who care passionately about this, become a member, get stuck in. Vote on conference motions, change policy, say that you'll quit the party if your MPs don't vote differently. The sole purpose of all activism between now and the winter should be not to have debates amongst ourselves, but to pressure and persuade and cajole and encourage MPs from the two larger parties to do what the vast majority of them in their hearts knows to be right.
And that is a very strong note on which I'm afraid we must end. I apologise to all of you who wanted to ask a question who couldn't be called. I apologise to all the students who wanted to come to this who couldn't. You will know some of them. Tell them that this has been filmed. The video will go up, I hope, very early next week on the UCL website, and you can all watch it all again if you want to. Go out and buy the book. It's commendably short, and it's a it's a rebuke to us academics who write excessively long books. Thank you. That was tremendous.